Hi there, I'm Annie Poole. I'm an occupational therapist at Skills on the Hill, and I wanted to talk to you all about play today. Okay, we're going to jump right in and really talk about promoting flexibility and creativity through play. To start, I want to go over some play milestones that you will see at different ages or what you'll expect to see. So, birth to 12 months, that stage of play is really exploratory play. So, when we talk about exploratory play, it's really two main things that are really being engaged. That's the motor system and your sensory system. So, movement, learning cause and effective movement. So your hands and your feet, and that's when you'll see babies learning, how to grab their feet and how to reach for something. And then also sensory exploration with their eyes, with their hands, with moving their head and understanding cause and effect of if I touch something, does it make sound? Does it feel a certain way? Exploring the cause and effect, both with their own motor system and with the sensory experiences of outside objects, learning about the environment through the sensory systems. And then the next stage of play from 12 to 18 months looks like more functional play. So you'll see things like dumping a bucket out and then filling the bucket and dumping it out. So using a bucket for its sort of natural function. So fill and dump games. That's when you'll see that type of play interacting with actual materials in more of a functional sense. And then around 18 months, growing through those next months to about 2 years, you'll see simple pretend play. So that will be something like pretending to fall asleep and then wake up, or pretending to feed an animal or a doll. So small movements that are maybe one sequence. So instead of going to bed and tucking the baby doll in and then singing it a song, it would be just that sort of one motion, understanding sort of that give and take of one bit of pretend play, which then once you hit 2 to 3 years really expands to activities. So you'll see pretend play with something like sleeping and eating, but you'll see things like representation. So maybe a towel could be a blanket instead of needing an actual blanket, or you could get a baby doll dressed and you might use a cup for a hat, something like that, where there's multiple steps being put together for those everyday activities. But what you're seeing is pretend play of activities that they're familiar with, things like getting dressed, like going to the park, like eating, things that are everyday activities that they're familiar with. And then parallel play also emerges in this 2 to 3 year range. And what that means is playing alongside their siblings or their peers, playing the same type of activity, but there's not a lot of engagement or communication between the two individuals. So it takes on that sort of parallel. We're next to each other and we're playing together, but there's not any crossover yet of playing the same activity or the same thing together. And then for 3 to 4 years, you look at those pretend play experiences expanding. So you'll start to see children playing in a way that's they're playing out a sequence of things that they haven't actually experienced, but maybe it's something they know about from a book or a TV show or a story that a friend told. So they might be playing out a story of climbing a mountain that they saw somewhere, but they haven't actually been to a mountain or done those things like going camping or going hiking. They could play out different scenarios with something like like driving, where they haven't driven to a new place, but they might be exploring new places that they've heard about, and they might be pretending to take a trip to places that they've never actually been. And you'll still see those everyday routines and activities expanding, things like going to preschool and all of those daily activities tend to be pretty prevalent in play as well. And this is when you'll start to see them sequenced even more. So it might be something like getting up to go to preschool, and they're pretending that they're going to a preschool with friends, and it's that they're going to get up and eat breakfast and then get in the car, get on the bus, and then they get to school, and then they sequence different parts of the play that they would have in real life. And then 4 to 6 years, that pretend play expands into, oh, I skipped associative play. So associative play is a part where you'll see peers side by side playing, and you'll see them interacting a little bit with their play materials and with their language. So they might be engaging in, let's say they're doing Play-Doh side by side or across from each other at the table. They might both decide that they're making rocket ships with their Play-Doh, and one could ask their peer, like, oh, where's your rocket going? They could say like, oh, I'm going to Mars. And then the individual might say, me too, or I'm going to the moon. So they're both playing the same activity and sort of bouncing ideas off each other, but they're not working together towards a common goal. There's not really a relationship between them, such as like brother, sister, mother, daughter, things like that. And then, so next, jumping on to 4 to 6 years, you'll start to see pretend play really change into imaginary play, and you'll have more themes and scenarios that are longer, played out sort of spans of time and activities. So for imaginary play, that's when you'll see things that haven't ever really happened. So make believe stories with pirates and dragons and robots, kind of whatever you can think of. And then play themes that might include, this part of the room we're going to pretend is this place, and over here is where we go when this happens. So there's more of a plan, and there's more of a sequence of events that has a whole scenario surrounding it. And this is when you'll see cooperative play as well. And that is that next step from associative play. So working together, communicating and engaging in the same materials, and working towards the same goal. So you might both be trying to hide from a certain pretend character or dragon or monster, or you might both be working together to get somewhere. So you're in the same play world, working towards the same set of ideas. And then 6+ years is when children become more interested and more motivated by games and sports. So those types of play scenarios that have rules and have different sort of nuances that you have to understand, and different goals, a totally different goal from pretend play. And that's when that becomes more motivating. And the interesting sort of play on dynamics socially is how that changes is we're cooperative, but then things start to become competitive. So that includes a lot of social navigating as well, understanding the dynamic between individuals. If we're playing the game together, are we working together? Are we against each other, but we're still peers? So that whole social piece is a really big part of games and sports. So next I wanted to talk about just the foundational components of play. So sort of like I was just saying, social, emotional. For play, we really have to understand the social and emotional dynamics of turn taking, of listening to a playmate when they have an idea, and being able to accept that, we can listen to their idea and my idea. We both have ideas, so it's a give and take. Also understanding relationships between people. If we're playing doctor-patient, what does that mean, and what does that look like? How would a doctor respond when a patient says or does something? As well as just the maturity piece of being able to come up with those scenarios, that social emotional piece of understanding how to follow the sequence of events and knowing how those scenarios might play out. Language is a huge part of play. So being able to articulate your plan to someone else, listening to their ideas and understanding and following through with their directions, being able to add voices to your characters and narrate your play as you're going. That's often a huge part of play, is speaking for a character or becoming a character or speaking for a figurine. So being able to add voices to those pieces. And then sensory and motor. There are so many ways that sensory and motor development are important and really crucial to play. So considering in this picture, you can see two kiddos playing in a sandbox. So you can think about the tactile experience of the sand, the proprioception, that muscle awareness, that muscle and joint engagement of picking up a sandbox, being able to grade force or not a sandbox, a bucket of sand, to understand how heavy that bucket is, and then grading force while you're pouring it, and the body awareness while you're playing with someone else to have an appropriate distance of space between the two of you, as well as understanding balance. So being able to walk across the sand without falling, that is understanding our vestibular sense. You can also consider the sounds you might be hearing. If you're on a really busy playground, being able to filter out those sounds and focus if there's a lot of visual stimulation happening. And then there's a lot of motor coordination that happens when manipulating small objects like dressing dolls, or if we were doing Play-Doh, that type of pretend play with Play-Doh uses a lot of manipulation as well and planning to create something that we have in our mind. And then for something like a sandbox, like having the strength to really scoop and coordinate those movements. And then cognitively, that component of play is really important for the planning and the execution, as well as for the reasoning behind why we're playing certain things and why a certain series of events might play out, as well as problem solving when there are challenges that we face during play. So next I wanted to talk about sort of that next level component of play, and really wanted to dive into praxis. So this might be a word that you've heard before, but what it really means is sort of the coming up with ideas, sequencing and putting things together, and then executing our ideas, which you often might hear it called motor planning, and praxis really kind of spells it out for us and tells us what really goes into the planning and the preparation and the follow through of motor planning. So ideation really means coming up with ideas, and that can be a really challenging area for some children when you see them play with an activity or a toy the same way every time. Ideation is being able to see something new and come up with different ideas for how to use it. This might be an idea for a play theme, an idea for how to pretend an object is something else, an idea for what character I should be in this play scenario. We use ideation constantly. And then sequencing is putting things together. So knowing, first I do this, and then I do that, and then I do the other. So in play, that's important. If we are in a play scenario, we're playing school. There's sort of an understanding of, first we get to school, and then we do our school activities, and then maybe we have lunch at school, and then we follow through that way. So just like there's play sequences with pretend, there's also sequencing for the physical aspects of play. So if we're building with Legos, the idea of what I want to create with Legos is the ideation, and then sequencing, knowing, I might need to start with the base and then build some walls and then build a roof if I'm building a Lego house. And then that execution piece is that physical, being able to complete those actions that we have planned and sequenced. So understanding how to move our bodies in order to make those things happen. And that could be, for Legos, that might be the manipulation piece. For navigating the playground, that could be understanding how to get my body to move, through the tunnel and across the bridge and then down the rope ladder. And praxis is so important for, play in a bunch of scenarios everywhere, really. We're constantly using praxis skills, but what it really comes down to is novel situations. So we become experts of our environments when we're there for a long time, and our body learns those motor patterns and they become ingrained. But really, some important skills to learn are praxis in a novel environment, which is one reason why, as an occupational therapist, I love creating new setups for clients. Like if we're in the clinic, I love to create a totally new, where all the equipment is in a completely different place every time the child comes in, because it's really important for them to see something new where they don't already have a motor plan built for that setup, but they have to come up with an idea and sequence the actions and then use that motor planning to execute them in a new situation, because that is a crucial life skill for things like navigating new environments and new things that we're learning, like in school and at home, maybe like learning a new cooking recipe. That is ideation for understanding, what I want to make, sequencing the steps and getting all the ingredients and then putting it all together. And if there's a new recipe, that's a totally new sequence and a new series of motor plans that you're coming up with. So next I wanted to talk a little bit about problem solving, because problem solving occurs when something doesn't work in our motor plan, in our plan and our sequence and our actions. Something's not working. And that could be for many reasons. It could be because of the way a peer is acting. It could be because I didn't think through all of my plans and I skipped a step. But the crucial a crucial part of problem solving is understanding that there's a problem. So seeing what went wrong. For example, if you're building a sandcastle in the sandbox and you're scooping the buckets of sand and the sand is just spilling everywhere, it's not sticking together. understanding, so I'm seeing something went wrong, and then knowing, what might have happened, that problem solving piece, just understanding the feedback, the visual, the tactile, all those pieces, we process what went wrong, and then we have to come up with ideas for solutions. So a huge part of problem solving is ideation, because we're coming up with ideas for how to solve these problems, and it's important to have multiple ideas. That's why some kids can become frustrated when something doesn't work, is because they have a difficult time coming up with a plan B or a plan C, because it involves ideation, coming up with a new solution. So this higher level component of play, the praxis and problem solving, is really important, and something that can be a challenging area for kids sometimes. So I wanted to talk about some behaviors that we see in play. Sometimes children will avoid certain activities, or avoid peer directed or therapist directed or parent directed or teacher directed activities. Sometimes that also looks like rigidity, liking to be in control and to make the decisions about what's happening, what play is going on. At times that looks like playing the same things over and over, or being unable to play independently, really requiring someone else to come up with the ideas or suggestions, or being there to help make that play move forward or make it really happen. And a lot of times these behaviors happen because of some underlying challenges. So it could be that you're having difficulty with the emotional and social piece of understanding relationships and understanding give and take, or that regulation piece and being able to regulate your emotions when a peer's decision is picked over yours in a play scenario. And so it may manifest as avoiding that type of activity, or liking to be in control and wanting, their choices to be priority over someone else's, because that emotional regulation of accepting someone else's idea is challenging for them. You might see a child play the same things over and over if something like ideation or praxis skills in general are a challenge, because once you've really mastered a motor plan, you're able to continue doing it over and over. The way that we have motor plans ingrained is when we use them in a successful way during a meaningful occupation. So that's for children, that's play. So by using a motor plan, that could be just their body coordination through a playground, or understanding the sequence of events for a certain series of Lego play, that becomes motor memory, and that becomes ingrained after a while once it's successful and fun and engaging for them. And so it may be easier and more enjoyable to do that activity over and over, because they know that they will be successful. Children who are unable to play independently, that could be due to some of the foundational challenges as well. It could be that they have poor praxis and are unable to really come up with ideas of what to do on their own. It also could be that they have some sensory and motor challenges, and it's uncomfortable for them to do certain activities when they're maybe overstimulated, or really need sort of that figure to be with them, to walk them through it and make them feel comfortable. Avoidance is another one that you'll see frequently with children who are maybe more tactile sensitive of things like messy play. You might see them avoiding something like Play-Doh, or playing in the sandbox, or cooking, something like that, where you're really engaging your tactile system with a big variety of textures. And it might be uncomfortable, that unexpected texture, the unexpected touch, not knowing exactly what something's going to feel like. So you might see avoidance in that type of situation as well. So something that we do as occupational therapists is we approach these challenges in two ways, two directions. We talk about bottom up and top down. So bottom up is an approach for addressing the foundational challenges as a way to help support those higher level functional activities like play. So if foundationally we have social, emotional, and language, communication, sensory motor, those are those foundational areas. And then next we have that motor planning, sort of sequencing actions together, and maybe some of that regulation piece. And then up at the top is how that all of those activities come together through relationships and activities and play and that dynamic, and being able to put all the foundations together. So by working bottom up, we address those foundational challenges by looking at motor coordination, at social skills, things like that. And then top down is working through the activity, both by adapting it to make it a better fit for the child, such as reducing auditory stimulation if they're really overwhelmed so that they're able to play more effectively, or by giving them verbal cues and modeling social scenarios for them so they understand the give and take of taking turns, um, and really working through play top down to address those challenges and to work on play as a skill in and of itself. So that looks like working during play to help with the activity itself. So I wanted to talk about flexibility and creativity, because using that sort of top-down approach, parents can really do a lot to help with play at home, working in the middle of play with flexibility and creativity, because I think those are two areas where we really can support children a lot, and they are really foundations to play and what that looks like, especially things like pretend play and building, which are huge parts of a young child's sort of play skills. So when we think about flexibility, we think about being able to accept others' ideas, play in different ways, play in different places, play with new people, and accept that they might play with the same things I play with, but in a different way. And what that really relies on is the creativity, the ability to come up with those ideas, the ideation for how to play with new materials and how to play in new scenarios. And then the more and more you have that creativity, those problem solving skills, such as, if you're working with Legos and something's not working, and a peer's doing it in a different way, and you're learning how to be more flexible, you're learning problem solving, you're learning how to be more creative with your Lego play. And then that comes back around to help with flexibility, so that next time you're playing with Legos, you have those ideas in the back of your head for how to solve problems that may occur. You'll have more creative solutions because you were exposed to more creative solutions from someone else. And having that creativity will translate in other ways. For if you're making a craft out of useful junk like paper towel rolls, having that knowledge of creativity helps you be more flexible, because you'll be open to multiple ways of trying something, because you might have those ideas in your head based on that creativity. So it all kind of circles around that problem solving and ideation and praxis, you'll notice. But they really go hand in hand and work to help each other. So I wanted to talk a little bit about tips for what you can do. What can parents do at home? So helping with flexibility, one big tip is don't stick to one environment or room for play. This can be helpful for several reasons. So one is that it models for a child that play, it really expands those boundaries, so that play doesn't just mean like this game is this activity here in this space with these people. It shows them that little parts of play can change. We can be playing the same activity but under the table. We can play the same dress up game that we like to play, but we're playing it in the kitchen today. So it shows us that play can be flexible, and it really teaches just a little bit of flexibility with some of that, keeping the materials and the activity the same, but changing the environment. And it also adds the opportunity for exploration in a new way. So if you're playing an activity that you always play at home, and then one day you're in the park and you play it as well, that might allow for opportunity to add in new ideas, such as things that might incorporate sand or grass or whatever you find at the park that you wouldn't have inside your home. And it could be that just that exposure to the game in a new environment is what it takes for that new idea to arise. And then meeting the child where they're at and slowly adding on and changing. So I don't know if any of you have taken an improv class, but the first rule of improv is yes and. So what that really means is saying yes to what your partner, your peer, is saying. So agreeing with them. If they say, we're playing fairies, saying yes, we are playing fairies, agreeing with your words and your actions. So we're playing fairies, and then and. So and then contributing something. So agreeing with them, yeah, we're playing fairies, and my fairy is going to the dentist. So giving agreement and then proposing that new idea. So this can be helpful for making them feel comfortable. You're accepting their ideas, but you're showing them that this character that we've created can also do something new. And this kind of ties into that next step, modeling, is that it's so important for parents to model different ways to play, because that shows children that you feel comfortable with new ways of play, which is going to make them feel more comfortable with new ways of play. And it could be that your ability to bring excitement and joy and novelty to the situation is captivating for them, and so they follow along. So if you say, yes, I'm a fairy too, and I'm going to the dentist. That shows them that there are other ways to play fairy besides whatever they had previously played. Or if all they could think of was we're being fairies and then they didn't have any other ideas, you've just modeled at least one new idea. And then another thing that you can do with respect to modeling is using a toy that they're using with them, but adding something slightly different. So instead of like a pretend play scenario, I think a lot of children will get a little bit stuck on Legos or cars and play with them the same way every time. So always, driving the car on the road, always building the same thing with Legos. So by modeling, by first meeting them where they're at, if your child is just driving the car on the road and that's sort of all they do, you join in with them, you drive the car on the road, but maybe your car flips over and you see how the child reacts. And then you're driving with them on the car, on the road, you're both driving, and then yours jumps over a bridge or jumps, and maybe there's no bridge, but just pretends to jump. So meeting them where they're at, showing that we're still using the same materials so that they're still comfortable and we're still in the same environment, but that there are some new things we can add in, and seeing if they'll pick up on any. And I think it's also important not to, in that type of situation, not to push to see what happens if we just keep the environment calm, because that's what play should be. Play should be fun, and that's sort of their time to explore and learn. And the way that they will really learn is when they're successful in a meaningful occupation, like I said before. And so if it becomes not meaningful or not enjoyable, they're not going to be learning. They're going to shut down. So next I wanted to talk about helping with creativity. So if you're thinking like, well, I guess we could play with toys the same in different ways, or we could play with, cars in different ways, but what if my child just only goes towards the same toys every time or the same activity? And then we're still engaging in almost the exact same thing, but how do we get to that next step with new ideas or building on play? I think first, continue exposing them to a big variety. One way you can do this in the environment is adjusting where toys are in the room, in the home. If you have like some bins of toys, sort of like changing them up, rearranging them, moving something that's been there all the time, that's a frequent play activity, and putting something in there that maybe they haven't played with in a few months, maybe a year, or adding a new bin that has something like kitchen tools in it, something that you can really just get from the kitchen. Just get some spoons and forks and put it in a bin and add that to their play set and see what happens. And then next, this is huge, asking what else and other WH questions. So when I'm engaging in play with someone, I'm very frequently asking things like, where are we going? What are we doing? Who am I? Why are we going here? What's that? If they're engaging with a play toy or something that's pretend play, just saying, what is that? See if they're able to label what they were playing with. And then if I said, what are we doing? And they said, oh, we're, going to the forest. We are construction workers going to the forest. I'd say, what else? Like, what else are we doing? And seeing what else can they come up with when just given that prompt to come up with more. Are they able to come up with more ideas? Because sometimes I think they just need that time to process and to really understand. And by asking what else, they're prompted to come up with something else, which they might not otherwise think that they need to or want to come up with another idea. They might just think, oh, I thought construction workers going to the forest was enough. And so saying what else prompts them to expand. And then providing choices, because children aren't always going to be able to answer those questions. And sometimes they can get overwhelmed by the world is our oyster idea. Like, well, what am I? I could be so many different things, or where are we going? I know so many different places. So giving choices, especially when they tend to, if you ask, where am I going? And every time they say, we're going to the forest, giving choices. You could say, where are we going? Are we going to school or are we going to outer space? And by giving choices, that, gives them some selectivity. They can go whichever place they want, so they're still a little bit in charge, but you're able to expand by showing them two options of how they could expand their play. Another suggestion, I think, for the home environment is combining play sets and materials. So I was playing with the child the other day, and we did magnet tiles on a muffin tin, because magnet tiles will attach to metal, and that can be done on the fridge or on your railing outside your house. It can be attached to the garage door. So that's a simple way to take a material that they know well and add another aspect to it. So they feel comfortable and they know they'll be somewhat successful because they are successful with play materials, but then the play materials that you're adding something to, like magnet tiles or Legos or dress up clothes, but you're adding this sort of novel aspect that helps them translate that familiarity into a new setting and expand their experience with it and their creativity with it, and really learn a little bit more of that cause and effect of, well, I know if I take the square magnet tile here and I put the triangle here and the triangle here and I lean them together, this is what happens. But by just moving environments to the garage door, they're learning a lot more about why things work the way they work, which then helps them with problem solving down the road. So I wanted to share some visual play cues that I created for working on expanding play when someone might have difficulty with ideation or initiation. So being able to really just start play. So that includes selecting an idea and really starting it. So putting together that planning piece and getting to that first step or second step. So this really walks you through, what do we need to know in order to do play that we're doing right now? Like, what are we doing? So it sets the stage for the who, the what, the where, and the how. So for who, this for example gives specifics of are we animals, people, aliens, or fairies? And this is just something I made up and have been using, but you can totally change it based on your child. If there are certain play themes you think they might be interested in, you can incorporate those. Or if there's certain ones you are trying to steer away from, because let's say they're always playing firefighter and putting out the fire, and you want to see them play something different, maybe put some different ideas up on that board. So I'll have the child select who are we from these choices, and then what are we doing? And so here I gave 6 totally different ideas for ways that we could have a play scenario. So this can help with a child who isn't really sure what to do in play to make it a full-fledged scenario, other than, maybe filling a dump truck and dumping it out. But you want to make it a whole scenario. Maybe we're building and fixing, or we are exploring and searching. We are having a party, which would include a lot of that praxis of setting up and knowing what we need, and then having the party, knowing what happens at a party, and how do we make that happen? How do we have all the pieces and put it together? So this is the what are we doing? And then where are we? So I have just 6 different places that would be somewhat familiar theme ideas. So hospital, school, park, home, space, forest. And again, these you could all totally change based on your child and what they're interested in or what areas you're hoping to expand. And then how do we get there? So these play cues can give the child a framework for what activity we're playing. Because at times I think children know that play is manipulating objects and it's engaging with other people, but there's a lot that can be vague about play, especially when playing with other peers and maybe they haven't been communicating about what they're both thinking, their ideas, their plans. And so it could be kind of vague, but this gives them that structure and shows them, well, if we're playing, we should think about who are we? What are we doing? How do we get there? And then the next step that I think can be really helpful, I'm going to skip ahead to this one for just a second, is walking through that plan. So helping walk them through planning what we need. What are the steps? So, okay, we are aliens having a party at the park. What do we need if we were aliens having a party at the park? I guess we would need some food. So let's go find some food. We get some food. And then, what else do we need? Do we need other aliens? Do we need balloons? And so that could be something where you give options like that and helping them really find out, what this is what we need. And it walks them through planning and sequencing a play scenario, which then can help them build those skills of thinking, what do I need? Okay, I need this and that, and collecting, and then starting. So then object affordances, this is something that can help with those praxis skills of, if I said something like we're aliens planning a party and we need food, coming up with what could be food, what different items could we pretend are food? So object affordances means, what can I use this object for? What are the qualities of this object that lend itself to being used in different ways? So for example, something like a cup, the object affordances of a cup tell us how we can use it for things like scooping and like balancing and pouring and drinking and wearing it as a hat and standing it up on its side. We could roll it. We might roll in a circle, but we could still roll it. So object affordances is an important part of praxis for coming up with ways to sequence and execute actions. For example, I once saw, I was working with a child, and we were in the clinic, and there was a ball pit, and he wanted to sort of like surf over the ball pit, standing on a block. And so both that sort of planning, sequencing, and execution of that activity were a challenge for him, because that ability to plan an activity that was realistic, that could really play out, depended on the object affordances of the surroundings and his body. So understanding, can my body surf across the ball pit on a block? Understanding what about this block would work for that, and what maybe won't work for that. That would be object affordances, as well as understanding the steps that need to go into place. So being able to know how my body would start, middle, end, and then can I execute that? And so in the end, when he tried the action and it was unsuccessful, we talked about why it didn't work and what parts about the object we should maybe change, what objects would work better, and then about, are our bodies an object that we can really use to surf across a ball pit? So talking about object affordances is really important for understanding how our bodies work during play and how our objects work during play, and really in life in general. So understanding object affordances is helpful for something that I'm sure adults do all the time when you think about in new situations when you need to work with what you have. For example, if you're in the kitchen and you're stirring something and you're realizing, oh, like what I'm mixing is really sticking to this type of spoon. I need this type of spoon because that's better for this. That's object affordances, understanding what about this object lends itself to work in this situation. So I talked about this, walking through those praxis steps. So then to end, so those are really my big tips for how to support children in play for flexibility, creativity, and those praxis skills. And I wanted to come back to the foundational components of play, because we dove into praxis a lot, and that ideation and problem solving, and also how to work on the flexibility and creativity. And I think I talked about how these are those foundations for play, so that play can flourish. But what's really cool is that thinking about that top-down processing and that top-down approach, is that play really helps us build those skills as well. So just like I talked about how children learn and really ingrain these patterns and skills when they occur in a successful way in a meaningful occupation, is that when play is meaningful for a child and they have a certain social interaction with a peer and it goes well and they're able to work together towards a common goal on an activity, that's reinforcing of those social skills, and that helps to make those social skills more second nature. And it's the exact same with language, with navigating conversations with peers. Once we do it in play and it works, it's effective for understanding how to ask for something, how to ask a peer for, can I have the cookies if you're doing a kitchen game. That really reinforces the functional aspect of language and how it can be used, and really makes that second nature. The same with sensory and motor play. So understanding, well, I put these two pieces together and made this type of shape with these blocks, and I'm understanding that when I navigate my hands in this pattern, that is reinforcing for those motor skills, as well as the sensory piece for understanding, being comfortable with different textures, or being able to navigate a dynamic surface. When you're able to do that in an effective way during a meaningful occupation, it becomes that second nature. And those cognitive skills also come into place with, I was talking so much about problem solving and that sort of being able to make a decision during play. So deciding where you want things to move next, and that problem solving and planning piece is really big as well. So play, it really starts with these foundations, and then it really comes right back around to feed them. So working from the bottom up perspective is something that therapists often do, and teachers as well, working on those foundational skills. And you can work at home just by, talking to your children a lot, using language, building motor skills through fine motor activities and gross motor play, and working on those cognitive reasoning skills, as well as, talking about, communication and social dynamics and relationships, but also through play is really how children learn, and is such an important way for them to understand those skills like regulation um, and and social skills and motor skills. So it's a cool circle where we can really support kids from both sides. So to end, I just wanted to wrap up by saying thanks for listening. I think that play is such a huge part of the everyday life of children. I know I talked a lot about pretend play, but these skills are also really relevant for older children as well. If you think about something like games that older children start to play, like on the playground, if they start to come up with their own game that they're playing with, maybe a ball, understanding the object affordances of a ball, coming up with an idea for how to play the game, coming up with the sequence that those games would need, a certain sequence of events or steps or setup, and then being able to physically execute those steps and being able to see that plan into action is really important. And these translate into adult life as well. We are constantly using those skills, those problem solving abilities, to come up with new scenarios of ways to do something so that a challenge we occurred before doesn't happen again. So I think that really play is something that is so important for building those skills, building flexibility, building creativity, problem solving, praxis skills. It's really important and something that we can all work on constantly to really just support those skills, and it should be fun, because that's what makes it meaningful, and that's what makes it helpful. So thank you for listening. I'm Annie Poole at Skills on the Hill, and if you have any questions, you can check out our website. There's more information there. Thanks for listening.